Hey, what's up? Zach here, and these are the 3 biggest reasons why you're experiencing sudden foot pain after exercise. Here we go. Now, of course, there are exceptions to every rule, but really sudden foot pain after exercise or even during exercise, no matter what the sport is, typically boils down to 3 things. Number 1, it can be a stress fracture in the bone or stress syndrome in your bone. Number 2, neuritis, nerve entrapment, really anything inflammatory around the nerve. Or number 3, bursitis or inflammation of those tiny sacs of fluid in and around your foot. Really, no matter which one of these 3 things it is, the big question is, why is it happening, how to stop it, how to prevent it from coming back in the future. So number 1, and by far the most common cause of that acute foot pain, is stress fractures, stress syndrome, really any bone marrow type syndrome. Now remember, bones work to make themselves stronger in one way. It's called Wolff's Law. Now what happens is when that bone is subject to stress, what happens is it takes that stress up to a certain point, and then typically there's a rest period. And during that rest period, that bone then kind of reabsorbs that weaker bone and then builds up stronger bone. It's almost like Ultron at the end of Avengers Age of Ultron. He crushes his weaker form with his stronger form, right? And typically, those stresses on bones are a beneficial thing as long as there is an adequate amount of rest in there. That's what keeps us healthy, right? That's why in elderly people who aren't very mobile, or even younger people that aren't mobile, they're much more prone to breaking a hip or other kind of sudden fractures because their bones are so weak because we're not giving them stress. So what happens when you actually get a stress fracture? Well, that happens when you've put so much force on that bone within a certain amount of time that the bone does not have time to reabsorb all that weaker bone, that bone does not have time to reset, right, and to strengthen, and then you've kind of gotten into this window where the bone is now left really unprotected, and then all of a sudden little cracks start to form in that bone. That causes a lot of pain, and if that isn't stopped there, that's a stress fracture. If that isn't stopped, that goes on to a completed fracture. Now, a lot of times stress fractures do not show up until after you are playing because it's kind of like a wave, right? It takes a little bit of time for that pain cycle to, kind of crest, right? Because inflammation in the bone does take a while. That's why you always hear people say, it's after I do something, right? Like I played basketball for 3 hours and then the next day it started hurting. That is very typical for those. Whereas an acute fracture, right? You jump up, you come back down, you crack it. Obviously, it's gonna hurt a lot there. Typically with people, we really hope to get them in the stress syndrome type, right? Where the bone is just inflamed, right, and angry, because that is pretty easy to calm down. That's just rest. When you get to a stress fracture, that's usually when you need a boot, immobilization, protection, and then, a completed fracture. Sometimes that's even surgery, right? If it's displaced or if it's in a bad area. Now, by far, the number 1 cause of stress fractures I see in my practice is number 1, people trying to train too hard, too soon, just too much. And number 2, which is becoming a really close second, is people going from kind of a normal cushion, normal stability shoe to more of a barefoot or minimalist shoe. Remember, barefoot minimalist shoes, not for every foot type, not for every gait style, right? If you have a very hard gait, right, you're a really heavy heel striker, even proximal midfoot striker, even forefoot striker sometimes, you're putting a ton of shock through your foot and leg. And if you're someone that doesn't have a very tuned gait, remember, barefoot shoes, in my opinion, distal midfoot striker is the best. That's where the meat of your foot really is. That's where all the muscle is. That's where all the cushion is on your foot. And that's where you can actually build up the most muscle to withstand a barefoot shoe. But what I see a lot of people doing is they see people in barefoot shoes, they see the benefits of them, and there are a ton of them, but they decide that they're gonna do the same 5 miles 3 days a week, going from, let's say, a Nike Vomero, right, or a New Balance 840 or something like that, and then go right to a Vivo barefoot. Those bones in your foot are not used to that. You are not giving them enough time to kind of build up to that. And some people just, like I said, do not have the foot type, they do not have the gait style to make a barefoot shoe work. So I would say number 1, it's just increase in training. Remember, it's summertime, springtime, you're getting out more. You've gone from completely sedentary in the winter, you haven't really run the streets at all. Same thing with basketball, right? You go from a hardwood floor, then maybe you're going onto asphalt or concrete. Same with tennis, like you were playing when you get court time, and now all of a sudden you can play all the time because it's outside and it's free, and now you're just doing too much too soon. So that's really the easiest way, is just to start slower, right? And then build up and just not try to go crazy. The next thing is you really have to, like I said, look at your footwear choices, right? That comes down to number 1, shoes, number 2, orthotics. And I do have a free orthotic fit and wear guide in the description below that kind of shows you the best way to figure that out for yourself. Everybody is different. But like I said, with shoes, a lot of times if you are deciding on a new workout regimen, it's not a bad idea to go see your local doctor, especially one that's, well-versed in sports medicine, to see what is the best shoe for your foot. It's not going to be the same as maybe somebody else. Remember, if somebody tells you that one shoe or one orthotic is the best always or never, that is probably not a good piece of advice to follow. Like, if you look at me, for example, Power Step, they are a huge supporter of this channel. Who knows if I'd even be able to do the channel at the level that I do it without the support of Power Step. But if you ever hear me say that you should be wearing a Power Step for every single person at every single time, then you should run and find another YouTubing foot doctor or in real life foot doctor, because that's just not the way it should go. So remember, it really has to be tailored to you, not just the general masses. That's why I always say, see your doctor, see what they have to say, especially because they can usually see some little things in your foot that might not be a big deal right now, but might be a big deal down the road and try to prevent these types of stress injuries. Now, the second most common cause of acute foot pain typically is any sort of nerve entrapment, nerve injury, inflammation around a nerve. I've had some pretty personal experience with this with snowboard and ski boots and tying those too tight, but typically a nerve injury can happen even just from tying your shoes too tight for just maybe an hour or two on there, and that hour or two of having your laces too tight or your laces just around the wrong part of your foot can have nerve pain for weeks on end. I've had, I remember one time I had maybe 8 to 12 weeks of numbness in my third and fourth toe because of a snowboard boot that I wore for, 4 or 5 hours. That's really it. So that's a huge cause of it right there. Number 2 is if the shoe is just too narrow or too constricting as it is. A lot of times I actually do have a free shoelace guide too in the description. You can check that out. That can show you how to tie around different parts of your foot with your laces. It also sometimes can help to get wider laces, more cushion laces, because that really disperses the weight, or putting, padding or moleskin under your tongue. There's lots of ways to disperse that pressure. But ultimately it comes down to getting the right fitting shoe for you. I actually have a video on that. I'll link that in the description as well. But with nerve pain, as long as you recognize it immediately, typically the nerve will just kind of heal itself. Same thing like the stress reaction, just given enough time, once it's kind of allowed to breathe a little bit. Once you go down the rabbit hole though of nerve injuries can actually be a little bit more of a long-term issue, even more than bone. Because once a nerve starts to die, it starts to send really bizarre signals up and down your leg. People always come into the office with these types of injuries or these types of problems saying, I can't describe the pain, I know what it feels like, I know it's nerve pain. And that's usually how I know that it's a pretty bad nerve injury. So the best way to prevent this is if you notice any tightness, cramping, irritation on that nerve, just make sure you readjust your shoelaces, readjust your shoe, or get the shoe off early. And if you are experiencing those symptoms for a longer period of time, make sure you get that nerve tested, make sure you see a doctor, because there are interventions that can be done in and around the nerve to really bring those symptoms down and help repair those fibers. The third most common cause of acute foot pain is bursitis. Honestly, this is coming up too just because of the barefoot running trend. Now remember, in your foot, there's little circular sacs of fluid under a lot of the major bones of your foot, especially under the heel and under the ball of the foot. Now these are supposed to be the natural cushions of your foot. They only work so well on asphalt, cement, concrete, those things. Remember, your human foot is meant to walk on sand or soft earth, not asphalt, concrete, or cement. That's why we have cushioned shoes, to more simulate sand or soft earth. So these sacs of fluid, a lot of times, if you put too much stress too soon on them, same as a stress fracture, can get very, very inflamed. The problem with bursitis is sometimes they don't want to stop becoming inflamed. So typically stress syndrome, right? Like you got some inflammation in the bone here in the ball of your foot, right? Give that a little bit of time, it goes right away. Bursitis sometimes, as soon as you start again, it gets inflamed again because that sac of fluid is just primed with inflammatory fluid. It's really hard to get out of there. So a lot of times with those do require longer term solutions, longer term orthotics, sometimes even, advanced therapy, which we try not to get into with bursitis because they're in such bad positions under the ball of your foot. And we typically don't like to inject around there if we don't have to. But I would say bursitis, it's been the least common, also the lowest energy type injury I see, but definitely the most long-term annoying injury. I've seen ones that just keep nagging people over and over again. A lot of times in the heel though, it's because people think it's plantar fasciitis and it's not, it's actually bursitis. So with bursitis, like I said, the treatments are actually pretty easy if you can follow them along. It's just getting the diagnosis of bursitis sometimes can be hard because it does mimic stress fractures, sometimes it can mimic nerve injuries, sometimes it can mimic plantar fasciitis or tendonitis or other things. So it's getting that diagnosis down, and then all of a sudden the treatment becomes a lot easier. You can do it just with kind of little, arts and crafts, almost like we called it in the foot with orthotics and pads. So I hope this helped you. I hope, if nothing else, it encouraged you to seek assistance, seek the help of a doctor if you are experiencing any of these, and just knowing that it does really happen to everybody. If you're not getting some little nagging foot pain here or there with exercise at some point in your life, you're probably not working out enough, honestly. So like I said, I hope if nothing else, it just shows you that the right diagnosis and seeing the right physician is typically the way to make these things, go away as quickly as possible, as well as preventing them from, rearing their ugly heads again. So like I said, if you do want to check out how to actually fit the shoes the best for your foot to try to prevent some of these injuries, I will leave that video linked up above, and make sure you subscribe down below. Respect your rubber and foam. I'll see you somewhere in the Sneakerverse.